Okay. Hey class, hey Dr. K. I want to do a little video discussion this week just because talking into a video makes me kind of understand the material a little bit better. And the immunological system is just always probably been one of the hardest things for me to kind of conceptualize compared to the cardiovascular and the metabolic system and whatnot. So I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into question one and then kind of piggyback on some of the topics that Dr. K, that you just brought up in your post just this morning. So I'll talk about that a little bit on question one, and then I want to introduce a research study that I found as well that I'll link below for you guys to check out. But when I look at that question, the number one, remembering a time where athletes were sick, I kind of want to use myself as an example. I've worked with a decent number of athletes, but I'm always my own guinea pig. So where I see this problem I rarely got sick. I think that as me like training for a long period of time, resistance training as well as endurance training, I've yielded the benefits of the responses of resistance training, where I've for a long period of time I've done resistance training so that acute response of inflammation has gone down significantly, and I actually attribute a lot of my strength and lack of inflammation to the fact that I resistance train on a regular basis. But on another side of the coin, I want to introduce a little bit of a topic that I bet can hit home for a lot of personal trainers. I worked at a personal training like an LA Fitness for a couple of years, and I was working a lot of just miserable hours. I didn't mind it, but what was happening is I was doing 5 a.m. I was training clients, and I would train throughout the morning, and I would go do some other things. I was interning at a strength and conditioning performance center as well. And what happened was I would have a tough time getting in my workouts, but my workouts were really important to me, right? And so oftentimes I would neglect my own immune responses because I wanted to go and strength train, or I didn't want to lose my gains. Obviously that's the thing we always worry about in this space, but it takes a lot more time to lose your gains. But that being said, I would often have to train at very odd periods of time where my recovery, my rest, and all those factors were certainly taken into account. So, for example, I would have days where I would train, say, in the middle of the day on one day, and then the next morning I knew I wouldn't really have much time, so I'd do like a 3 a.m. workout, right? And if I was smart about it, maybe, and I got adequate rest, and I was manipulating my strength training and endurance protocols, it would have been a smart option. But what I wasn't doing that, because as a trainer, you want to try out every new move. You want to go all out on everything. So I would have times where I would train myself. I would do a resistance session midday on one day, and then the following morning at like 3 a.m. I would go and hit a hard like endurance session or something like that. And what the problem was, when it accumulated. So maybe doing this for a week wasn't a problem, but doing this over an extended period of time where I was not recovering, because probably I'd hit a resistance and endurance session with maybe 12 to 15 hours in between. I wasn't getting adequate sleep. I was maybe sleeping, 4 to 5.5 hours a night, which, obviously to build strength and build muscle, I need, 2 to 3 more hours at least. And what I think the rationale, I didn't necessarily get sick. I had times though where I felt really fatigued. So for me, that fatigue and sickness is kind of a tough line, because that fatigue signaled to me that I was overtraining. But I didn't often listen to that, right? Because I just wanted to work out. I kept going. And so suppressing my immune system day after day without giving it the chance to fully flush and recover would probably make me at like a very heightened state of so my white blood cell count, my leukocytosis, if you will, would probably have been pretty low, because I was suppressing my immune system over and over again by introducing high intensity endurance and resistance training day after day. And I think without a proper programming protocol, and that's why we see it in these structures in a periodization plan, where you have your high, medium, and low days. Without that type of protocol, that's where you see these fatigued and overtrained states. And depending on how strong your immune system is, obviously can result into the getting sick, right? And I think one of the bigger things too, which we'll note later, and the text alluded to this as well, the difference between testosterone concentrations and testosterone cortisol concentrations. It's a very real chance that I was stressing my body so much and that the testosterone was having a negative effect on my cortisol concentration, causing me to be in an overtrained, fatigued state where I was suppressing my immune system, potentially resulting in sickness, right? So those are kind of my thoughts on that first question. I'm sure I have much more to add, but I'll jump into another point. As Dr. K, as you were alluding to with the overtraining, I think it's important to understand the protocols. Using ourselves as trainers, as guinea pigs, can be really beneficial. Maybe not necessarily for overall health, but it can be useful in terms of determining what level of training is necessary that you can give to your athletes. Obviously, everybody's different in individual variants, but what level and what intensities you can play around with to help manipulate that so that you're not going into that overtraining state. Now, on the opposite side of that, though, there could be value in having a little bit of overtraining, what I believe it's called functional overreaching, where you actually put your athletes into a little bit of an overtraining state to give them that heightened feel, but then bring them back down, very methodically. So I sit in a couple camps on that. I think you don't want to be in a prolonged heightened period where you're completely overtrained, because what's going to happen once you get a period, if you're overtraining for a long period of time and you're not giving yourself adequate rest, that fatigue is just going to accumulate. So you may not feel it, say, at the beginning of the week or so on, but then once you give yourself adequate rest, you might hit a wall and just hit absolute barrier, and you won't be able to perform at the level that you want to, right? So those are kind of my initial thoughts there. I don't want to go too much on of a rant, but lastly, I wanted to introduce this research study that I wanted to bring up. Not really necessarily about overtraining, but definitely hits to the points that we're looking at this week. So I took something from the journal, the Strength and Conditioning Research, and it was time course changes in performance and inflammatory responses after acute plyometric exercise. I'm very interested in plyometrics. I think there's plenty of more research that needs to be done on it, but the high neural output and force production that happens with these plyometric movements definitely has to be taken into account in terms of neuromuscular fatigue and overtraining, and our body's responses to that in the immune system. So what we basically looked at, these researchers were looking at jumping performance, and they measured the immune response over a 5-day period, and they were looking at the primary markers in leukocytosis, CRP, uric acid, IL-6, IL-B, cortisol, and free testosterone, right? And what they noticed from doing their protocol, I'll link it down below, but they did 50 hurdle jumps and they did 50 drop jumps, just to give a little bit of a context there. And they found that leukocytosis persisted for 24 hours post-exercise. CRP increased post-exercise twofold and peaked at 24 hours. Uric acid increased at 24 hours, but then peaked at 48 and remained elevated for another 96 hours. IL-6 increased twofold and remained increased for 24 hours. And then cortisol and free testosterone increased, peaking between 48 and 72 hours. I think the biggest thing that they noted in this was that immediately post-exercise, there was a decline in knee range of motion. There was an increase in DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, creatine kinase, and then LDH, lactate dehydrogenase. And there was also a leukocyte infiltration with neutrophils, about 50 to 60%. The study noted that it's partially can be attributed to the cortisol increase in circulation. So I really think that the circulating levels of testosterone and cortisol, in the way it interacts with the cytokines, in the way it interacts with the white blood cell count, has a serious implications to how we recover and how we manage fatigue over a long process. And obviously, the sex characteristics in testosterone, obviously male versus female, it can be have inhibitory effects. And since there's more testosterone, usually free circulating testosterone in males, there can definitely be a problem in males having some sort of sickness or more immune systems potentially than a female would. So that's my quick little 10-minute rant. I'm sure I have more, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, get a discussion going, and see where it takes us.